Hi everyone, my name is Frida. I am a PhD student at UAP, University of Puebla from Mexico. I am pleased to talk to you about what I called as Pathemic narration from the perspective of a specific picture book called Akim runs. The content of this presentation is divided in two parts. The first one will be a brief introduction of some concepts that illustrate where I am building my work. The second one will be those concerns applied to semantic waves and constellations, both seen as a toolbox that underlie from legitimation code theory. And last but not least, a few reflections about what I am proposing. So let's go ahead with an important quote from Yuval Noah Harari. He says that in order to understand our future, it will be not enough to decipher genomes and numbers. We also have to decipher those fictions that give the world meaning. But how can we decipher those gears that build the codes which we interact day by day, and even when we are just kids? So how can we denaturalize those codifications? To answer these necessary questions, I'll refer to one fiction developed in the codification of a picture book. Its name, as I said before, Akim runs. It tells the story of Akim, a boy whose village is bombed, and because of that, he starts running. However, he also wishes to recover everything he lost in material and emotional terms. At this point, I refer to a codification of picture book because, at least in this text, there's a constant interaction between written text and image. Image, by one side, has a predominant paper in the narration itself because it's the major narrative construction, the 79 images. Text, by the other side, accompanies and even detailed the visual narration with some contextual frame as the name of some books, the village where the story develops, and even socio-historical facts as in Akim village war seems distant. Text is a secondary code, having only 12 appearances. Accounting this, Akim runs is a story not only about war, but diaspora, loneliness, survival, but most of all about sadness and fear. I mention this because the story allows us not to read but feel. As Karen Little says, literary reading should be seen as an occasion not only to interpret but more as an occasion to feel through body and affections. So I want to highlight this word, feel. In order to this, I classificate Akim runs as a pathemic narration, starting from 2 points of view, Patrick Chagadeau and Roland Barthes. Chagadeau, by one side, says that discursive analysis can study the discursive processes which entails and develops an emotion. The pathos, this Aristotelical concept, has a natural relation with language and the way it configurates to create persuasive discourses. Barthes, by the other side, defines a narration as an implicit system of units and rules that leads to a description level, and these levels had a hierarchical relation, and none of this level can produce sense by itself. So, with these reflections on the table, a pathemic narration is a narrative text which is not a result of being a sequence of action, but in this case, of the fact that it's intertwining the loss of home and family with diasporic migration due to war that conveys emotion that appeal to the reader's empathy, letting us read, of course, but mainly feel what we are reading, creating a visual experience and quoting Mitchell, who has no neutrality due to its ingrained to the social, politic, and discursive phenomenon experience. With this, I want to demonstrate that picture books have a rhetorical potential to build social knowledge by means of deeply emotional fictions that enact the possibility to reconsider hegemonic discourses about topics like war, diaspora, among others. So now, which elements make us feel the way we do? What do we feel? How is this narration shaping the way we see complex social problems? To respond this, I applied semantic waves and constellation analysis in order to explicit the essence, structure, and their function in the way we think and perceive these types of mainly visual narration. I've divided the book in 12 blocks of analysis, and for explanatory ends, I'll example the way I analyze the whole text through the first block. These blocks are defined by a segment of written text and the images that follows that. As I informed earlier, there are 12 segments of written text and 76 images in the whole narration, so let's start. According to LCT, there are 5 dimensions: specialization, semantics, autonomy, temporality, and density. Here, I'll focus on semantics, which Mayton defines as the one that builds social fields out of practices like semantic structures whose organizational principles are conceptualized as semantic codes. These reveal how expressed knowledge gradually changes depending on its context and complexity. So here, I want to emphasize in its semantic codes. Mayton argued that these codes are made up of forces like semantic gravity and semantic density. Gravity refers to the degree in which meaning relates to its context, and density to the degree of meaning the condensation within a text. These waves trace recurring movements between relatively decontextualized meanings and context-dependent ones. From these semantic outlines, it is possible to see the narration's emotional pulse, and at the same time, the later sets that the pace and the way the story interacts with the reader. This approach is mainly thought for written text, but what can we do with visual narration? As Chris and Van Leuven discuss, like linguistic structures, visual structures point to particular interpretations of experience and forms of social interactions. Expressing something verbally or visually makes a difference. This way, in the analysis of visual practices, emotional condensation will be alluded to, and it will follow the same criteria of closeness and distancing when it comes to context, but conceived from images, noise, and silence. So, talking about these two concepts, Hannaford states that sound and noise are expressed in pictures through aesthetic decisions such as point of view, texture, the atmosphere description, and the small presence of an individual before a landscape. This way, noise can be made up and bring silence to the surface in order to highlight a contemplative action. Both concepts offer a valuable perspective that allows us to explain in bigger detail the emotional force that is present in these texts. All these let us exhibit the symbolic and visual emotion social practices. Both features have the potential to magnify emotion and actively help the reading pathemization process in Akim runs. Therefore, a monochromatic space with less subjects or people will convey a more silent scene, which translates into more visual density. An active person or object and more detailed strokes mean stronger visual gravity. Although both codes make use of the semantic dimension of LCT, the textual field will be called textual density and textual gravity, and the visual field will be called visual density and visual gravity in this work. Talking about the decisions in the image, it's important to remember that a text is a bunch of decisions that are taken to certain objective. With this in mind, Mayton and Doran explained that constellation analysis allows us to describe a group of ideas, beliefs, practices, or in this case, emotions, which form the pathemic field, as a larger combination of possible decisions to create a specific path within a social practice. A constellation analysis will be useful to identify the elements that take part in the emotional algorithm and of the text analyzed. However, decoding the components will make evident not only the maze of feeling used to pathemize, but also the way the word is conceived from the story's point of view and the possible perception of the reader through the delimitation of the emotional nodes, which outline action domains within certain discourses can develop. The enactment of semantic waves and cosmological analysis let us outline the narrative pulse and the elements that prompt the beating of the pathemic story. Okay, so let's move on to a briefly textual analysis. Even though there's not an English version, I'll be working with my own translations. The first block of analysis, that is actually the one that introduces the plot, is constituted by a set of 1 paragraph and 7 images. So here it is. The text. In Akim village, war seems distant, the first clause. Akim plays calmly with other kids and their small boats by the Kuma River, second clause. But at the end of the afternoon, a deaf noise and gunshots are heard in the sky. The roar becomes louder and louder. The words in red are semantics' main focus. I divided it into 3 clauses due to organizational reasons. In the first clause, war is part of the first point of the semantic wave. It not only offers an overall view of that phenomena from a semantic condensation of what it implies, but also a sensation of repetition. This sets the beginning of the wave at the highest point, where textual density is stronger. In the second clause, I choose place as the main focus of attention, as it shows stronger semantic gravity when accompanied by an adverb calmly. It connects the performance of an action with a perceptive domain of peace, which creates a contrastive relation regarding the domain of the first clause. The wave falls as shows stronger textual gravity. In the third clause, the focus is on deaf noise, which offers package concepts, but also strengthens a pathemic process through a contrastive semantic relation. This clause deprives Akim of any agentiality, as he is suddenly involved in a highly emotional and violent field that grows thanks to the mental process that involves perception. This emotional field is emphasized by the lengthening of the roar becomes louder and louder, which creates an atelic process. It means that it is not completed. This way, the wave raises to a stronger textual density. So, the textual wave looks like this. In a visual level, the classification is the result of the noise and the depiction of objects and characters in the image. Let's remember that we are facing a narrative visual text. It means that every image makes sense viewed as a sequence. Although I made a detailed analysis image per image, for expository ends, I'll say briefly that image 1 takes place in a middle point. There is a balance between the character and the context because of its composition and noise. Image 2, balance is lost and attention goes to the context outlining, specifically that of harmonic place where attention is on the house, which is conveyed by size and outline. Pathemically, a notion both of a structure and a home is perceptible. Visual gravity is very strong. Image 3 is a distant view and everything is quiet. The wave rises to a point of very strong visual density. In image 4, the picture's dynamism is grounded by the character's gaze, which focuses on a middle point. In terms of composition, the strokes focus both on the context and the characters. The wave is in a middle point. Image 5, there is a clear representation both of patient and agent in the dynamic process of the bombing. It shows stronger visual gravity because of the smoke. In image 6, we are allowed to see facial expression for the very first time in this sequence, which is also an important kind of noise. This let us infer a precise emotion more easily. The character looks surprised. We can also perceive a sensation of contemplation towards the action of escaping. This shows strong visual gravity. Image 7, we can see the context and the characters with more detail. The pathos is visible in the character's facial expression. Unlike the previous picture, transformation is evident. We can see the character's face go from surprise to fear. The process of the patients are appreciated more clearly, so that wave reaches strong visual gravity. So, once that I talk about image per image, let's go to constellation. The constellation allows us to unify both semantic codes so that we can identify the components of the emotional algorithm and, of course, the basis of the semantic coding of this picture book. We're seen as a macro theme develops, in first instance, fear as a primary emotion, but what detonates it is by one place terror and by the other worry. These two in a dependent relation that magnify the fear that welcomes the story. Thus, LCT can be a toolbox used as a methodological instrument to sense the beating of a narration. It can also let us trace a path in which diverse representation of social practices can be enacted inside a macro practice. It also creates a conscious interpretation that translates into knowledge both social and as a tool for literacy of multimodal texts that state new ways of interacting. However, if they don't have accurate strategies of literacy, they can present too fast and superficial opinions regarding this text interaction. With this brief analysis example, I wish I showed the tip of the iceberg of the complex discourse structure of visual images mainly, but of texts that shows us ways of feeling some realities through the chance of feeling with our body as a mirror. As we've seen, we go inside and outside Akim's perspective thanks to these higher points of visual density, and with this, our emotions are shaped in a dynamic ways that enables a mirror perspective in Akim's body. In other words, knowing the poles not only trace the pathemic field, but let us explicit a kind of roller coaster in which we had our feelings. We can feel because we recognize the other body in Akim's one. We feel the noise, the deaf noise. Akim runs and we run. We are no longer in a safe place as we stay in this contemplative act of image. I would like to end saying that fictions give us the chance of walking, but emotions let us draw the path to that world that is coming and the way we are going to face it. What will be legitimate and what we don't know yet. Let us feel, not only interpret, let us experience and bring to conscious the semantic codes that are immersed in our daily life. Thank you.